Our guests today are Clay Newmeyer and Joseph Salesbot Lucani. They are two master electricians with a business addiction. Too many fail in their small business, and they are not going to rest until they change the game. So they host a podcast, and they do a lot of Facebook Live videos and coaching as well, but we're looking forward to a great conversation with them. Welcome to the show, gentlemen.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Hey, thanks for the intro.
Yeah, good to talk to you guys. We took the opportunity to catch up a little bit before coming on the show as we were figuring out some microphone stuff. And we got to know that Clay is in Vancouver, right?
Way up north, northwest.
And way up north. And Joseph is in New York. I didn't know what city. You said the city, but I didn't know where that was. Where's that at, Joe?
Yeah, I'm in New Windsor, New York. So pretty much you can assume that we are Orange County. That means we're not in the city. Surprisingly, everyone seems to think when you think New York, they think, oh, you're in the city. Which borough? Like, nope, we're in the cow country part.
Yeah, common misconception with New York. It's pretty much just one city.
Yeah, it's just one city and everything else is just not city, right?
That's right, yeah. Well, welcome to the show, fellas. We're excited to have you on. And I know that both of you are well acquainted with the social space, and you're doing good things with the your groups and everything around them called Electricpreneurs. So why don't we start there, talk a little bit about that, and then also how you even got into the whole electrical side of the home services business to begin with.
Awesome. Clay, if you mind, we kind of like answer it together. I was going to say, I'd love to talk about why we're here. And then Clay, do you mind describing what we do?
Yeah, man. I mean, you want me to get you started here? Here we go. For electricians by electricians. Oh my God, why is there such a shortage on resources for electricians? Okay, Joseph, tag, you're in, buddy.
Awesome. Love this guy. So the thing is that when we started off, like I've been an electrician since I was 14 years old. I remember I started really kind of trying to get into business and learn a little bit more right around 2011, 2012. And at the time, there really weren't a lot of resources to learn. I remember I was desperate to learn, and I've got my own stories. And in my interview, you guys can hear more about that as to the why I struggled learning so much. But the problem was there just weren't out there. The trainers were not available. And the closest I could find was like the generalist HVAC plumbing coaches that also touched on electric. And I invested everything I could into that. But what I realize now, years later, is that in order to develop and really, really train on good quality electrical training, you have to be able to speak the language. So the difference between us and some of the people of the past is that Clay and I are both licensed master electricians. We've both ran businesses. We've both had to be out and doing things. Like, I know I could put Clay in front of a PLC and he could do an amazing job. I know I could put me in front of any residential situation and I'd be able to clean it up and get it done. But because of those reasons, I feel that qualifies us to speak to that demographic.
Yeah, for certain.
I think there's a great story that Joseph, you told me before, and that was, having being someone, skip ahead, who has done some coaching with plumbing and HVAC models as well. When you get multi-trades in the same room and try to support them at the same time, we're always disengaging someone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's unfortunately way too common. Like one of those situations where some people will say, well, this applies with electric too. And it's like the concept of, well, if you can sell a condenser or if you can communicate why an anode rod needs to be changed, you can communicate why a customer needs to have their aluminum wire taken out. But it goes so much more in depth to that. There's a lot of subtleties that require someone to understand. Like a lot of times you could think to yourself, just a basic example, take a call that an electrician would struggle with, where they'd say, well, that's great if the customer's home has aluminum wiring, but what if I show up and they've just got a trip GFI? It would require an electrician with a deep understanding of home wiring to be able to say, you know what? Yeah, you could just do this, or why not consider localizing that so that GFI is not tripping multiple things? Why not install a quad box? Why not install USB protected points? Why not install surge protected points? Why not diagnose how it's wired based on our knowledge of it? So long spiel trying to wrap short, you need to be an electrician or have a strong understanding of electrical systems and how to communicate those with customers if you're ever going to be able to rise above your competitors.
Okay, so you're taking the specialist approach. You're the nanosurgeon as opposed to just the general
Before
medical.
we get into surgery here, buddy, let me just say, as a guy who stands up Wednesday mornings and at least every Wednesday morning and trains plumbers, HVAC techs, and electricians at the same time, that what he said about you're always losing somebody is like dead on. Like trying to conduct a meeting on presentation selling when you get product specific for all three teams at the same time, it can be tricky, no doubt about it.
I gotta say, I appreciate that, and in every way, like looking up to you guys, I think you guys do an amazing job for what I've seen. So I appreciate all your efforts and you guys showing up to help everyone out there who's listening as well.
Yeah, thanks, buddy. And we try to make everything as general as possible. So let's just talk about selling. But when it's time to talk specific products, you have to talk. You have to be trade specific. You almost have to.
100%.
There is no
100,000%.
There is no you can sell a tankless water heater. Therefore, you can sell an upgraded panel. Like you have to train each one individually. And I will say, reason we brought electricians on here onto the show in the first place was like we just found it impossible to get a trainer in here who was electric specific. So we brought someone in who said they could do all three and did all three. And they did, 80% HVAC and 15% plumbing and maybe 5% electrical, maybe. And it was not.
Yeah.
And as I combed through the trades, I found that there are very, very few resources for electrician specific. There are very few for plumbing, but there are a lot more for plumbing than there are for electrical. And I think it's a prime market for something like the Electricprenuer podcast and training that you guys do. And for anyone who wants to get into a new wing of training that's kind of unexplored right now, it's the residential electric aspect. There's just not a ton of good resources out there for it yet. I mean, there's good presentation training across the trades, but when you get into specific for products and stuff like that, it's not a whole lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And one thing that I love that you said, thank you. Yeah, we appreciate that as well. Hey, you had mentioned something that really stood out, and that was in the residential market. And I feel like you're 1,000% correct on that, because when you're going into homes, it's operating very, very differently than when you're going into a commercial setting. Because when you go into a home as an electrician, we have an obligation as a professional, not just to solve the problem. We're not repair people where we're just going in to be like, oh, I'm just going to make it keep working. We have to look at this and say, not only am I going in to fix the problem, but I'm also at the same time trying to solve an emotional pain point the customer has. Because with HVAC and plumbing, when something's not working, like it's going to be 87 degrees in New York this week. I know for a fact that there are going to be people who are going to say, I need my AC working. This is too uncomfortable. I don't want to deal with it. But if you have a countertop outlet go bad, or a room that you never really use doesn't have light, you can delay that for a long period of time. So what we specialize in not only understanding the what and the why, but now learning into how can we communicate that so the customer doesn't feel overwhelmed, so that they feel heard, and then also that they can understand the value that we're really trying to bring to the table. Does that make sense?
For sure, guys. And before we get too far, I'd like to understand a little bit about how you got into the trades yourself. Like, what is your personal story of how you started stripping wires?
Sure. I was going to say, sure, Clay, do you want to take it first? Do you want me to go first? What would you rather do? I don't want to neglect either.
You know what? We just did my personal interview on our show last week, and it aired today. So that's pretty fresh. So you know what? I'll give you the 10-second tidy journey. For me was honestly, I think a young age faced a lot of adversity rather, and then I just wanted things my way. I just wanted to work for myself. So as a 18, 19-year-old, I started my first company. It wasn't electrical, it was concrete. And I didn't realize at the time the skills I was developing and really the tenacity that we put forth. But I was going door to door selling driveways for $5 to $10K a pop. And we just canvassed entire blocks of neighborhoods and we just made it work. Me and a buddy of mine, and then took on a big project a couple years later, massive, like a $44 million municipal project, and lost my shirt in so many ways. Mm-hmm. But I paid my staff and absorbed that debt to the government instead of bankruptcy, instead of writing stuff off. So I've always had good intentions, and I saw this huge gap in my business and project knowledge and experience in ethical boundaries. I mean, I shouldn't have even been awarded this foundation for this building, this development, but I was, and I learned some of my best lessons in life from that failure. And so it just this burning passion to like fill that void. And as I did for myself in my second business, more in the project realm, because the next good fortune I had was electrical came my way within a year or two after my failure. And I just went straight vertical. I just haven't stopped. And it was everything I could do to work at the highest level for that company that helped me get into this trade. And then it was, okay, I'm an electrician. I've been running projects, doing $3 to $10 million projects. Then it was, I'm going to get my PMP and be a project manager and fill that void. And it was, okay, I'm going to be a master electrician. Then it was, hey, I'm starting a company again. It just kept going until realizing, you know what, when COVID happened, we all felt the world change. I was like, man, I'm trading all my time out there for projects. And projects are so unforgiving. And there's so many people dealing with the same challenges I did with that I just wanted to help them. And so I just went full time into this, into helping other contractors, other electricians develop their business, better understand their projects, and then eventually found home service. And that's what eventually attracted Joseph here. And we've been partners now for a few months in this journey.
Well, fantastic. What about you, Joseph?
So my story is a little bit different. And it's a little harder to condense, but I'm going to do my absolute best to try and make it as concise as possible. I started off in the trades. I started off as an electrician when I was 14, 15 years old. Pretty much, I just knew up to that point in my life that I was different. Like, I just knew I was different, and I had a very different relationship with my family as well. So, like, when I was 14, I literally went to my father and said, "Sir, what should I do with my life?" And he kind of looked me up and down and said, "You're going to be an electrician." And I literally said, "Yes, sir," and then went to trade school. And luckily, I fell in love with it. I absolutely fell in love with it. And the reason why I loved it so much was I thought that it was a way out for me. Like, I've always struggled to communicate with people, and I've always struggled in a lot of different ways because I'm actually an autistic person, and I didn't realize that until I was like 27, 28 years old. So for me, the trades was like a safe haven to get to, and in a way that I thought that I was going to be able to, oh, if I do this, I won't have to talk to people. The problem is that I've learned to really grow in this trade, you have to learn how to communicate, because you can be the best electrician in the world. Like, you can turn better wires than anyone else. You can know the code like back of your hand. You can be really good at install. But if you can't communicate what you're doing to yourself and your team members and your clients, you're just going to continue being a very unemployed electrician. So I remember I started getting out, so at 14, 15, and then I ended up getting into a multi-trade company right around 2011, which was right around when Hurricane Sandy was going around. And I ended up getting into generator maintenance at this company, and they found that I had a knack for them, but I just couldn't sell. I could not sell for the life of me. I was the worst salesperson I personally have ever met. Like, I couldn't close a job that was physically, like, you could have had no power and I'd walk out without being able to sell it. So this company, they believed in me enough to say, like, hey, we'll invest in you. But the problem was that I was so unhappy with my life and where I was at, because I didn't know that I was autistic and I didn't know why I was so different at the time, that when I found out that they were pretty much going to fire me if I didn't succeed with this sales training that they sent me to, my thought was, I'm going to kill myself when I come home. So to transition this into a slightly less dark conversation, clearly I'm here with you guys right now, which means that I didn't go through with it, which means that I didn't fail at it. I took the training that was provided to me and I dedicated my entire life to it. And I perfected that process and modified that process and shifted it and grew it and made it my own until 7, 8 years later, I was able to consistently do $1.3 million out of my service van. And I was consistently hitting an 80% close ratio on residential service calls. So it's kind of like this story where I started off being the worst possible salesperson, but through personal development, learning about who I am, learning about how to communicate, starting my own company at the age of 22, developing and perfecting this process, it went from I felt comfortable to really take on and educate others on how to do it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And it's interesting that both of you have such adversity in your backgrounds. I mean, from different angles, but certainly overcoming a lot of odds that were stacked against you. And I'm sure that creates a good dynamic between the two of you. And the trades is no stranger to adverse backgrounds or upbringings. And it seems to recruit, so to speak, those who have poor relationships with family and have made some poor choices in life. And so, hey, well, I'll go to the trades. I'll do some stuff like this. So as you look into, the electrical side of the home services business, and you consider all the people that you've done coaching with or training that you've talked to over the years, what do you see as like commonalities with that adverse background and where the trades is today? Is that something to grab a hold of and say like, hey, this is going to push me farther? Or is that something to have sympathy on? Or where do you find the adversity in the trades in terms of the current status and is where we could go with it?
I think I have an answer for this, Clay. Do you mind if I take a swing at it?
Do it, man. Go for it.
Awesome. So the main answer to that is 100% why Clay and I are here. Because as we talked about earlier, remember the main problem that we focused on was there are so many HVAC trainers and there are so many plumbing trainers and there are so many people who say this will work for electric. But there are very, very, very few actual electricians that are training electricians. I remember when I started my company, I was desperate. I was desperate to get advice. I was desperate to learn because I knew that if I didn't succeed, there was nothing but, an oncoming train for my future. And I mean that in a very literal sense. So the problem was, if you don't have people that can speak our language, we're always just going to keep feeling like the redheaded stepchild. And it's gotten better over time, but only in marginable amounts. So the reason why Clay and I are so dedicated to helping this industry is because we feel like we've almost been called to do it. There's no one else stepping up to the plate to specifically work with electricians. Like we will literally turn down HVAC and plumbing contracts specifically to work with electricians more. And I feel like that's the direction this industry is going to be shifting to.
And guys, can I kick a little bit of knowledge on this one? Because it's something we're so passionate about this. Have you guys ever heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs?
Oh yeah.
Right. So, I mean, we don't have a visual, but we can talk through it a little bit. And I just want to say, like, what is adversity? What is that, right? It's kind of the challenges we face at the bottom of Maslow's triangle, which first is your physiological needs, air, water, shelter, food, reproductive, right? Then it goes safety and security is your next level. Then love and connection. Can we all agree that adversity is likely a deficiency in those three levels of Maslow's hierarchy of needs?
Sure. That makes sense.
Right. So then the fourth and fifth level are self-esteem and self-actualization. So one of the most important things to note about adversity is that people shouldn't be discounted for where they are in their values journey. If they're just not getting the air, water, food, shelter, that they require to focus on work, that doesn't necessarily mean they're not going to be an all-star, right? If they're not getting that safety and security, they don't have the pricing figured out yet to be able to afford a mortgage and be able to have kids, etc. Doesn't mean they're not going to be an all-star. And if they're not getting that love and connection, the stuff they need so they can go to work and feel appreciated and confident in themselves, doesn't mean they're not going to be an all-star. So something we talked about just last week is how, these all-stars and your roles and the adversity in the background, I mean, it's timeable. If we help people with those bottom three, the basement of the hierarchy of needs, we find all-stars just aren't ready in a lot of times. Does that make sense?
Yeah, man. I appreciate that perspective. Essentially you're saying like, hey, we're willing to draft single A, double A, triple A players in hopes and belief that one day they will make the pro team. And we're going to train them and coach them where they're at right now with a desire and an emphasis to get them where they need to go.
100%, right? You miss 100% of the shots you don't take, is what they say?
Wayne Gretzky, Michael Scott.
Nice. Did that answer your question? Did we round that one up, adversity?
Yeah. And in terms of that, I agree with you totally that there is Brian and I talked about this before, but there's a significant lacking on the electrical side of things. And, I think for the most part, electrical has a lot of one-man bands out there kind of rolling around, where HVAC probably has a lot more titans, massive companies and things, and plumbers are somewhere in between. And so there's just a lot of, smaller operations that I don't think have quite caught up to things. And so it's great to have a set of guys like you who are not only knowledgeable in the background, but have a desire to see that side of the industry grow, putting your emphasis, your efforts, and your concentration into podcasts and training and everything that goes with it. So kudos to you guys.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Really appreciate you.
Transparently, it's 100% an ascension model. It's a value ladder. We show up live 5 days a week, and we give action items every day, an action and an all-star action. And all we ask is, we're trying to get behind every windshield, every office, every headset in the gym. Any electrician that can hear it can take away and take action and see a rise, see an improvement, see a benefit to it, and then rise up through the ranks so those all-stars can just surface. It just comes down to that activity, really.
For sure. So while we're talking about that, I mean, since you guys are putting yourselves out there specific for the electricians, what are some of those things that you're looking to see people overcome? You know, maybe let's start at the bottom. Like, what are some of the most common problems that you see, whether it's between the ears or between, you know, the hands and the tools? You know, what are the things that you see the electrical side of home services is struggling with right now?
You know what? I'll get it started, Joe, if that's all right.
By all means.
Yeah. We've got this diagram we use, and it's this mountain that we're all trying to climb, right? Everyone's got these milestones they're looking up at. But then we've got these dark clouds overhead. And one of the first ones and the most prevalent ones is really what we call self-objection. And this begins to answer kind of the race to the bottom thing that happens, where people come in with pricing and there's really not a lot of forethought into it. So they're underpriced. So they're not able to grow with the amount they're charging. But then when they learn the price that they should be at for a healthy service growth company, you meet a lot of self-objection. So there's a lot of change that has to happen for a lot of these contractors to really take hold and build something sustainable and great that's going to be able to create jobs and give back to a community. And that's hard to face.
For sure.
That's actually really, really well. That's really, really well said, Clay. And I was going to say, can I add to that? Is that all right?
Please.
Let's go.
Awesome. So when I first started off, I want to say that Clay's story is literally one that I had to experience. When I started off, it was just me, a partner, and a van. And we were under the impression that, okay, well, I'll make $50 an hour, and you'll make $50 an hour, and the company makes $50 an hour. So we were stuck at like this $150 to $165 an hour rate, thinking that that's what electricians are supposed to charge. And as a result, we were often quoting things as we thought, this is how long it should take an electrician to do these jobs. Not how long it was going to take us or what our expenses were. We were just living through the thought of what someone else should be doing. But when we actually invested in training and we were like, all right, let's try and figure this out. What are we going to do? How can we get our company right? It turned out that we needed to be somewhere around like 300, 380. And it just completely blew my mind because I was told I needed to get there, but the ways of getting there wasn't clear because it was through the lens and through the means of an HVAC and a plumbing company. And we were electricians. So we could listen and we could try to extrapolate that information, but it wouldn't translate fully. So that's why it took so long to actually see success. And where our focus is going to be is we've had to walk there. And because we've had to walk those paths, we shouldn't let our clients take 7, 8, 10 years to figure it out. We want them to figure it out within the first year, if not the first few months. So that's why it's so important that we have to talk about these kind of things.
Yeah. And there's really a couple answers. A great question, by the way, right? The next one I would say, we hear this often. Well, I saw that script. You guys gave me the front door script, right? I know what you want me to say when I take that call, but that won't work on this side of the Mississippi. That won't work down here in Texas. That won't work here because. And so there's this, I think we tend to generalize and look at serving a community instead of embracing that it's human psychology. And this stuff's not brand new, guys. There's going to be a lot of crossover content between our process and your processes. And so the same applies to human psychology. We got to recognize that we're serving the person, not the community in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good perspective and certainly plays into your pricing as well, because your pricing shouldn't necessarily be reflective of what the market can bear, so to speak. It should be reflective of what it takes to operate your business. And you know, that needs to be whatever it is, wherever you live in the country.
100% agree. Couldn't agree more. And lastly, I would say for electricians, honestly, we're all a little, I could say this, I'm an electrician, we're all a little socially inept, right? We all love that code book so much. We all love our tech so much. And we love our tech terminology so much that we can lose our customers in that. And that's probably one of the other biggest takeaways.
Clay, can I add to that for a moment?
I think you better.
Thank you. Literally in that circumstance, that sums up electricians to a T. And Brian and Nate, I'd like to add that so many electricians use a dangerous word, and that word is to code. We describe things as code when we're describing things to people who have no idea what that even means. And the code isn't in place to make sure that the customer is, getting a system perfectly designed for them. The code just means that at a bare minimum level, it's not going to burn their house to the ground. So instead of saying things to code, we always reflect it as to safety standard or to modern safety standards. So getting the electrician to shift their focus away from what does this book tell me that I have to do, and instead translating it to how does my knowledge of this book allow me to serve the client's emotional and physical needs at the highest and most professional level. If you were going to sum up what we do, I'd say that is a very good way of describing it.
Interesting that you bring that up, because earlier one of you had mentioned the idea of self-objection, right? So the concept of not believing in yourself, of having a very low self-esteem, being beat down by whether it's, somebody in your family and your upbringing, or by its customers day after day after day, or just a generic like, hey, oh, you're an electrician. Oh, okay, cool. So moving on, it's this reputation that there is no value there, or very little. And I think, people like you guys and our podcast and a lot of the industry is trying to turn that around and instill the inherent belief that there is value in what is done in the field by people with their hands and the knowledge. And in addition, the communication that goes with it, like you guys had to learn and overcome in your own stories. But that's a long journey. It doesn't take, just a few days for an entire industry to shift their mindset to believing that there is worth and value in what we do. Right. And so as you guys like look into that, and whether it's, I'm a code book junkie, or whether, you're autistic, or whether you're just like an introvert type of thing, what are some of the strategies or encouragements that you can give out there to the electricians, or anybody really, to say, guys, you're worth it. There's value in what you do. There's value in what you know. And you need to bring yourself and act yourself accordingly when it comes to dealing with homes and homeowners.
I got a great story. Okay, we both got it. Am I up first?
Take it away, Clay.
All right, put it on the tee. I'm going to crush it. Okay. One of the best stories I've had for this, because what you focus on grows, right? We learn that when we're driving a car. You ever learn to ski or snowboard? They say, don't look at the trees. Why? Because that's where you'll end up, right? So that self-objection, to give you a real example, when you're at the door with your new rate going, okay, on one hand, I know this is my sustainable growth rate. But on the other hand, how are they actually going to buy this? How are they going to perceive this? When I present, oh my God, I hope they don't think it's too much. Will they think it's too much? All those thoughts are clouding your best service, right? So filling your head with the good stuff is what's needed here, that you are worth it. And we add value to those situations, right? By understanding people, we can be very specific in what we're offering them and their needs at the time. So let me give you an example, this little story from a past client that we worked with last year a bit. He said to me one day, Clay, this makes me feel salesy. And we were talking about options and inspecting other things while you're in the house, basic inspection. And I said, okay, let's go to the whiteboard. And so what we did is we did a count of all his hours in electrical. And it worked out to like 45,000 hours invested in the trade. Guy is a guru. Friends call him for code advice. Yet he's being defeated by his own dark cloud when he gets to the door, trying to do the right thing with all this knowledge and experience. So on the flip side, I said, okay, now we're still on the whiteboard here. I drew a line across the whiteboard. Now let's count all your sales experience. And he goes, what sales experience? What sales training? What sales schooling? It was a big fat zero. So it's interesting that we show up feeling salesy and having these self-objections while never actually having any sales training in the background anyway, right? And so the idea becomes, you're a master electrician and you're falling short of the right thing to do because of this fear, false evidence appearing real, the acronym, that you're going to come off salesy. So here's what I say as salesy. If a customer calls you to replace a bathroom exhaust fan, and that's all that you do, knowing damn well that an electrician hasn't been in that house for years and won't be again for years, that's freaking salesy, man. Get in, solve one problem, get the money, get out. I've never heard anything more salesy in my life. So that's the big problem here. Joseph, can I tee you back up? You jumping in?
I love it. No, I was going to say, literally, it's hilarious how parallel you and I run at times, because I wanted to touch on that. So I'm now going to have to change my thing to now talk on something a little bit different. But realistically, the one thing that I also see that comes into play is that the technician doesn't value their own time. Like, they have this mental understanding, like, okay, I have all this code knowledge, but they're so worried that the customer that they're going to meet is going to shoot them down with the knowledge as if they're some electrical inspector in their own right. The thing is that the value in which we communicate what we're doing needs to also always be in the customer's best interest. So what I mean by that is this. You can be the best and the smartest electrician in the world. You could be this code guru. You could know everything about any kind of electrical design. But if you haven't been trained on how to communicate that value to your customer, the customer will always end up reverting to the value they originally suspected you were going to be at. So what that means is this. If you go to a customer's home and basic call, we find out there's an arc fault that's broken, right? Faulted arc fault circuit. And then you go to the customer and you say, yeah, you just got a bad breaker. They've got this mindset of saying, well, I don't know what an arc fault is, so that's useless. I know breaker, that should be about $10 to $15 and should take about 20 minutes to change out. So what are we talking here about? $75? And how many of us are charging $75 for that? But at the same time, if you can say what this thing is doing, this is a spark arresting system, or this is a spark sensing system, or this is an anti-fire system. This is a part of your system that detects whether or not you're going to have the conditions required for a spark big enough to start a fire, and it's automatically sensing to shut off prior to that happening. Would your customer not see that as more valuable? Would they not want that, especially if it was ensuring things are to modern safety standards? So to wrap up my long-winded statement, and forgive me for going a little bit on it, it's to say we know what we're doing in a practical sense. Our role is to communicate it in a way that a customer can easily digest it and that they can see the value as for what we're actually doing.
That's so
Does that make sense?
That's so good, Joseph. And we're totally in agreement with you here, man, because there's so much of whatever it is in the home services industry that, is weekend warrior type stuff, the flapper, the replacing one receptacle type of stuff. Like, lots of people can or try to do those types of things. And so it creates this perception that, what you're doing isn't really all that much harder. It might just be one additional thing. I could probably YouTube it or something like that and figure my way through it. And so what you're trying to bring in is all your experience and tailor make it with communication to help the client understand that this is far and above beyond what the normal weekend warrior Harry homeowner should be worrying about, focused on, capable of doing, in addition to the fact that, have you considered this? Have you considered that? Have you thought about this? Were you thinking about this or that? And all these other things that make your value proposition as a master electrician or journeyman or wherever you are, a professional, makes your value proposition so much more worthwhile in the home. And that's what the communication element of it is, right? Otherwise, you are just this guy in a corner that has tons of knowledge, but no way of applying it.
Exactly. And if I can dig into this a little bit more, it's one of those circumstances where we find that the average electrician, when they come to us and say, well, I don't know how you can create value for this, it often is on these quote unquote small calls. Like they'll say, well, I've got a ceiling fan and the ceiling fan is just in the box. They got it from Home Depot. It's right there. It's waiting for me. And they've already got an existing ceiling fan. How can I possibly create value for this? They're going to expect it to be done for $300. But then you look at the installation and say, okay, now is it truly perfect, right? I see a remote that's on the wall, which means that right now that fan has to usually be controlled. If there's no switch and there's just a remote, you're talking about a constant hot situation. And does that mean that if that relay that's controlling the remote were to fail, now this customer is stuck walking through their room in the dark trying to find the remote if for some reason they forgot to put it by the front door or by the door that leads to the room? So would it not be more valuable to the customer to be able to say, I recognize that you want me to do this, and I have options to do it the way you're originally suggesting, but would it be wrong of me to suggest other ways that can make you safer, more comfortable, and get more enjoyment out of this? Would I be wrong to do so? And simply just opening that form of the conversation, you'll find that customers are going to say, oh, I can't blame you. And yeah, you know what? It does suck when I know one of my kids takes the remote or the remote battery dies or I forget to move it somewhere else. Yeah, I would want to hear about that. And now you have the opportunity to explain that in a way that's not only professional, ethical, but effectively in your way of communication.
I love that. And Clay, a minute ago, you had talked about how one of the worst examples of salesiness is somebody going in and fixing a singular problem without considering anything else. So let's get down to brass tacks on this thing. Okay, so it's not uncommon for an electrician to be called out because a singular receptacle isn't working somewhere in the house or a single switch isn't working somewhere in the house. How exactly am I supposed to connect with the client about this one receptacle that's not working and somehow get the whole way through the rest of the house to have a more holistic conversation without tripping all over myself? What does that look like or sound like?
Yeah, for sure. And this one's going to be a team answer too, because we're going right down a really important corridor here. And just to add to what I said before too, with that fear, that false evidence appearing real, that self-objection cloud, it's so important to visualize this correctly as you're going to it, right? Don't look for the objection. Just eliminate objections by being a friend. Get your expertise out front by being a friend. And if you picture, instead of this being a new client that you've never met before, but an old friend who I'm going to serve at the highest level. I've heard Joseph use this example before, and I absolutely love it. If you're going to your best friend's house, are you not going to show him all the potential?
Well, I guess It depends. I mean, isn't that some of the head trash, right? So if my buddy called me up and said, hey man, can you come over and like help me redo the kitchen receptacles? You know, part of the industry would say, sure, man, I'll come over and do that. And I'm just going to go in and go out and get out of there because that's all my buddy wants me to do. And the other part of the industry might slow down and say, hey man, before we do this, we should really examine this, that, and whatever. So like you kind of have two different perspectives on that. Sometimes people view it as doing their buddy a solid by turning a blind eye to some of the other things, you know, because they don't want to have that conversation with their friend about extra money and extra this, that, and whatever. And then other parts of the industry are all about like, hey man, like before we do this, let's consider 3 other points before we got there.
100%. And I can appreciate that side too. So let me give this a little more context. For me, I think that the value in this exercise is saying blinders on. I'm going to serve this person 110%. If this is my best friend and they're a carpenter, not an electrician, or they're a dentist or any other profession, and they just don't know what they don't know. And we're going to transition to our process and give you guys some goods with this too. But given that context, I personally love educating people. I love being a part of that and getting to be the hero of the day. And so if I'm going to serve 110% this person, no one else, phone on vibrate, this is the only client in front of me, and I want to show them all the gifts that I have to give and let them make the choices on what fits and what doesn't. But I'll tag Joseph in a bit on this too, because as we go in, as part of our process, we're not going to the location of that fault first, are we, Joseph?
No, we are not. And Clay, talk about a setup. I love it. So we designed the sales process, not as a sales process, but as a service process. To serve the customer at the highest level, we need to bypass the objections that they're going to try to give and solve them before they even come up. So sometimes what people will say is, well, I go to the area of the fault and I see it's one bad outlet, and then I reset the outlet and the microwave comes back on and everyone's happy now. It's like, okay, well, did you take the time to check and see what's feeding that counterpoint? So the first area that we go to is we actually are going to see the panel. The very first thing we're going to see is that. And the justification isn't that we're going to try and sell them things. The justification is for our safety and for theirs. The first point we're going to have to look at is to ensure that we make sure all your emergency shutoffs and safety disconnects are in place and that they're functional. Before we can touch anything electrical, I got to make sure that if there is an emergency, I at least know which direction to run to turn something off. Can you blame me for wanting to do that for you and your family? Very rarely will they say no. Now, while you're walking to the panel, we're going to be asking the customer questions like, why is it that you feel it needs to be done? Who found the problem? What did they say? What are conditions that were present that made you even decide to call an electrician in the first place? Why not just avoid doing it at all? Why not just leave it broken? We're asking questions for the customer to come to us and start coming to their own revelation of why they need it done. So that by the time we're actually in the panel with the cover off, they have a vested interest in standing over our shoulder. And now when they see the cover off, they're going to be saying things like, well, no one else had to look at that. Why do you have to look at it? And just like as Clay was saying, where he wants to educate people, I can be able to go to someone and say, well, as a professional, we have an obligation to ensure that your safety is being taken care of. And the only way to ensure that these safety shutoffs are actually functional and working is to open up and inspect the wiring that's connecting it. Once again, can you blame me for wanting to ensure you and your family had all those things in place? A lot of times you'll hear, well, no one else had to do that. So every interaction when you follow our process, it allows you to not only further investigate things, but it also lets you communicate why you're looking for these things. We're not looking because we're trying to sell, but as a result of looking, you will find things to sell. We're not trying to make the customer say things they don't want to say, but we're asking questions that allow us to get the truth of the answer. So as a result of all these things, we truly can service them at the highest level. Lastly, when you had said, well, one side of the industry is saying, tell them everything, and the other side of the industry is saying, well, just tell them the bare minimum. I want to say they're both right. Both sides of the industry are correct. And that's what makes our method so much more effective. What we do is we always offer a range of choices, from the finest money can buy to the most bare bones Frankenfix we can come up with. So that, imagine if I was your best friend coming to your home, I could say, yeah, I get it. You bought a ceiling fan from Home Depot. The cheapest possible thing I can do is to just tap off that outlet, run some wire and mold on the wall, and then have that ceiling fan attached right onto the sheetrock. And it's going to be controlled by either a pull chain or a remote. That would be the cheapest thing. On the other end of the coin, what would be better? I'm going to cut in the wiring within the wall, or I'm going to run a dedicated circuit. I'm going to give you the reverse fan control. I'm going to make sure there's 2 switches. They're both going to be variable. You're going to have, a ceiling fan installed that will never get dust on the blade, ever. You'll never have to dust. I'll have it to where you can even have speakers built into the bulbs themselves to give you a truly premium level experience. Could you blame me for at least wanting to tell you, because I think you and your family deserve this kind of stuff? At the very least, could you blame me for wanting to educate you on what it would look like? And the answer usually is no, you can't blame you.
Well, I'm still stuck back on the speakers, man. If you can get my ceiling fan to be blaring some music, I'm all in. Let's go.
Believe it or not, it's 100% a possibility. And it's actually something that I would do in a lot of my customers, because a lot of times you have to think about, what am I truly doing? You go to, let's say, a living room or a dining room, and they've got a ceiling fan over the center, but you notice that they've got a large L couch in the room. What is that telling you? That's saying that this is a person that's probably entertaining more than one person. So as a result, my goal now is to say, how can I serve that need? And they actually make bulbs. You can even buy it from Home Depot. They've got knockoff, but you can buy bulbs that you can actually put in. So if a typical fan has 3 or 4 bulb entry points, one of them becomes a speaker bulb. And then what you could do is, when you turn on the fan, that bulb will sync to the pre-programmed customer's phone. So when the customer walks into the room and they turn on the switch, it'll automatically sync, and you can get it to play music for them or have it sync directly to their call. So it's just an extra level of servicing.
Yeah, man. I love it. And the way that you explain it is exactly what the industry needs. It's so intuitive, right? It just makes sense as you're explaining it, but it takes so long for people to wrap their heads around it, because it's been beaten into the industry for decades that, no, man, you turn a blind eye, you just walk straight up to the problem, you fix it, you mind your own business, you do your thing, and you get out of there as fast as you can. And then you have the other side of it, which is like, no, we got to give them everything. Like, oh, okay, well, they didn't really need a panel. And then you get into this whole argument about what the customer needed and what was right and whatever. Isn't it ultimately the client's choice as to what they want to do with their own money?
100%. And the logic therein was always, I refuse to spend your money for you. It is entirely unethical for me to do so. I don't know what you're going through, and I don't know what your financial situation is. But at the same time, because I don't know what your financial situation is, and I don't know what you're living with, could you at the very least blame me for wanting to design systems that had your highest level of comfort, safety, reliability, convenience, future enhancement? You don't have to move forward with them, but could you blame me for at the very least telling you about it?
Yeah, it's our job to make as many options available as possible to improve their quality of life, and then be as flexible as possible to help them realize it. That's the reality. So we had a client win I want to share with you today, actually, as we just got off a call earlier with our clients, and it was a dock, and he's out East Coast, and there was some dock upgrades that a homeowner was looking for. Can't imagine the property. It must be beautiful. They got their own access to the ocean there. But he came into a quick call with us, and was like, guys, I'm having trouble with options. Can you guys help? And collectively in our group, I mean, this is one of the superpowers of a better practice group, really, is everyone starts dropping options. And we, trying to get to 6, I think we came up with about 12 in 10 minutes. And then today reported back and said, okay, look, guys, here's the lowdown. This is a repeat client. I was able to give them 5 options. He's still working on the process. We're really proud of him for getting to 5, not quite 6. But hey, they commented, because they're repeat, they could tell the differences. They could see that now I'm offering more than 2 options, and they liked it. And they took my 3rd option up, which was a $3,000 upside. The clients are happier. I'm more paid, right? And everything's a go. It's an unbelievable win, and it's just one. And then he said this, this message, which is huge. I'm looking back and I'm thinking about how much has been left on the table. Not just money, but client satisfaction.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And that's the shame of it all, right? Because there's such this stigma against sales and everything in the home services industry that nobody ever takes into account that no, homeowners would actually be more happy if there was better solutions out there and somebody actually talked to them about them.
Oh my God, yes. Clay, can I just take a stab at this, because there's something I really got to say.
Crush it. Let's go.
Awesome. You can tell Clay and I, we try to pass the ball equally. I mean, I love the guy. He's brilliant. So I would never want to step on anyone's toes. So I'm glad that we have the equal say here. But the thing is, there are so many electricians and service providers as a whole that struggle to think of, what will my customer have to do when I leave, right? Like, the rule of thumb is electricians, we are usually terrible painters. Like, by definition, we're usually bad mudders and bad painters. So as a result, we don't want to offer it. But by not offering it, we now force the customer to take on additional projects or expenses that are outside of our control. So going back to that same ceiling fan quote, and someone's like, well, what do I do? They have the ceiling fan existing. How can I possibly quote for this? Well, okay, you got to cut in 2 switch lines. Maybe there's not an open attic. Maybe there's not an open basement. You got to physically cut walls to get it to the location. Who's going to patch those holes? And a lot of times everyone's scratching their head. So something that I found that was super helpful was saying we should either A, hire someone in-house like I did, where we had a built-in painter who would handle all the calls for us, or you subcontract it out to where you're like, you know what? In this price, you don't have to do anything but write us the check. We're going to provide the fan. We're going to provide you the premium experience. We're going to do the spackling, the sanding, the taping, the finishing, the painting, the whole 9 yards. And we're going to give you a warranty. And we're going to give you the club membership. And all you have to do is kick back your feet and finish signing the check. So by saying that, we realize that why aren't we thinking what the customer has to experience when we leave the house? Same thing applies to trenching, right? All of us want to do generators. All of us want to get into pools. But when we think about digging our trenches, some electricians don't want to dig. And even less electricians are thinking to themselves, you know what we should do? After we dig, we should come back with topsoil in the spring when everything's going to settle. And then we're going to reseed on top of it. And I'm going to come back here on a scheduled routine call to make sure you don't have any dips. Wouldn't that be the next level of premium service that most electricians wouldn't be thinking about?
Absolutely. And I think those are all great thoughts to be considering there. Ultimately, it is about serving the client and serving them to the highest capacity. Your knowledge, your industry specific experience, all that is at the service, the beck and call of the client's desire, but you don't understand desire without presenting options and opportunity for the client to take advantage of everything that you're bringing to the table. And that's really the crux of it, right? You know, we have 20, 30, 40-year electricians out there who have more industry knowledge than anybody. You know, we're talking like anybody in the state, perhaps. But they're not positioned it in such a way that the client is best served. You know, it's like a book that is never read that contains the secrets of the world. It doesn't matter if the pages aren't turned, and it doesn't matter if you don't present options to a client for them to take advantage of all of that amazing knowledge and experience that you have.
Oh my God,
Right.
That's so true.
Like the late great Jim Rohn once said, that old dog won't hunt.
Yeah.
Hey, Joseph said the P word. I got to let you guys know there's a bit of a funny story there. Joseph, how much do you love pool jobs?
I've been advised to not use profanity in this particular group. It's a family meeting, but let me just say, I hate pools at a molecular level.
Pool,
I absolutely hate
billiards?
pool. Like, okay, so like any kind of like swimming pool,
Okay.
hot tub. So the thing is I learned for a very long time operating at the premium level that we were operating at when I ran my company, was that there were a lot of other specific pool companies. Like there were companies that just did pools and would have like an electrician that kind of just subbed the work. You know what I mean? Like I'll do a pool installation for $500, for $700, whole thing, soup to nuts, whole thing will be done for $700. And yet you have a regular licensed electrician coming in at like $3,500 to do it. So I've actually learned ways of how to communicate value, even when it's so stacked against you. But the way to do that isn't by going apples to apples. It's actually by saying, I'm glad that I'm 3 to 4 times higher than that other person. And I can specifically show you why and what you're going to be getting from us as a result. So I wasn't sure if you were hoping I was going to be on the tee on that one, but I could talk about that as much as you guys want me to. I love
that one-liner. I love that one-liner. What did you say? We specialize in...
Yep. So the thing that we would do, if I can just take 5 minutes to talk about, or 2 minutes to talk about, I'll try and make it as concise as possible, was we hated pools to such a level that we were just losing on them all the time. And I couldn't figure out why. And, none of the coaches I had were electricians, so they had no idea how to advise me on it. So what I found was, well, if we're always losing these jobs to the $700 pool company, what I first started doing was saying, you know what? I'll offer a free inspection post-call when they're done doing all their pool installations. And what I was finding was that what was quoted wasn't what was always delivered. Like, yeah, you could say, I'm installing a pool disconnect. They're installing a pool disconnect. But what I was doing was installing a beautiful, dedicated 100-amp panel on PVC board and physically mounted with a Dynatrap connection and everything there. And they were installing a rocket post that you got from Home Depot with one GFI with maybe a bubble cover. It wasn't the same. So what I was doing was I was ended up taking pictures of all these installations, opening up, taking a look at the wires, looking at the connections, seeing that they didn't put no locks on the outside stuff, and noticing that it actually passed inspection. So what would happen was I started making a book of all these bad installations that were done on the cheap. And eventually we were able to go to our customers, and when they said, hey, we got someone who said he was going to do this whole job for $700, I would actually clap my hands and put a smile on and say, that's actually awesome, because we specialize in fixing $700 pool installations. Would you like to see how?
That's great, man.
Yeah. And I would literally have a book of all those pictures that I took. And I would say, you know what? This one was done for $500. This one was done for $700. This one was done for $1,300. And then I would turn over to the end and I'd say, and this is ours done for $5,000, or this is ours done for $7,000. And I would explain the differences because of it. And it always ends with, was I wrong to offer you this? Was I wrong to at least let you know that this level of safety or reliability or comfort was available to you and your family? And almost always they'd be like, no, I didn't even know that this was an option. Okay, so how would you like to proceed from here? And it was one of the only ways I was sounding effective at closing those jobs on a higher consistency.
I love that, you know what? I don't want to hijack your guys' show, but there's one more funny story. Joseph, you had your worst shock on a pool job, didn't you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Can I tell that one?
Do it.
All right. So one of the things that every electrician likes to say is, like, we all like to brag about who got shocked worse, right? Like, it always happens. It's always like, oh, I did this, I did that. No, I blew up one. Mine, I think, will take the cake for a residential electrician. I was working on a pool panel, right? It was like, it was a pool timer. I was in a pool timer and I was like under like a deck. So if I can give you like a visual, like, you know how sometimes you'll have like electrical enclosures that are like under a deck and, it's like a hidden away enclosure. So the first thing, remember why in our process we say we're always going to check the panel and we're going to take the cover off to make sure that the breaker is the right breaker. I didn't follow that process at first. This is pre-processed Joe. And I was working with an apprentice and I saw on the panel, it said pool disconnect. So I said, all right, that 2 pole 20, you're going to turn off right here. He says, no problem, boss. I'm going to do that. I get in there. He says he turns it off. I see that breaker's off. Okay, cool. I'm working in there. Turns out that the breaker was actually not the right breaker. That one leg of the 240 circuit was on the 2 pole, but the other leg was on the single pole 20 directly above it. So it still had half a leg on power. I didn't realize I didn't check. It hit me so hard that I actually hit my elbow. My elbow was touching against like a metal component of the frame and actually ground it out, went from my finger to my elbow. I actually still have the scar to show it. And it made me fall back so hard that I hit the post of the deck with enough impact that it actually shook a beehive. It was actually a hornet's nest off the under of the deck, fell backwards into a patch of poison ivy, I was getting stung by the bees during the process, all while still wondering what the heck just happened on the shop.
Man, that's brutal, man. Good story.
So I can say that definitely takes the cake with that.
Well, guys, it's been awesome, and the time has been flying by here. Before we wrap up, I wanted to give you the opportunity to tell to us a little bit about what's going on with Electricprenuer Secrets and everything that you guys are doing there.
What we're trying to accomplish with that is, as I mentioned briefly earlier, trying to get behind the windshield of every working electrical van in North America. And we know that this stuff works. And so we're literally on a 5-day-a-week mission, showing up live, and then those lives from our Facebook group go to our podcast. You can find our podcast on Spotify, on your Apple, iTunes, their Google Podcasts. It's all across, even on YouTube. And you can either search Electricprenuer, or if that's a little complicated, then you can look up the Electrician podcast, and we show up there top of the list. So otherwise, guys, you can actually join us live, engage with us on that Facebook group. Again, Electricprenuer or the Electrician podcast will get you there. Website's right under construction. We're a couple weeks away from that, but appreciate that. And that mission 5 days a week is to, be that risen tide that floats all boats to help you master sales, simplify pricing, and deliver premium level service. So that's it in a nutshell, you guys.
Yeah. So the Electricprenuer podcast, I punched in Electrician in Apple Podcasts while we were talking. Not that I would ever have my phone in here, ever, Nate. So don't look at me like that. But it's on the very first page, Electricprenuer Secrets.
There it is. Well, thank you guys so much. This has been an absolute treat.
Fantastic. It has been for us, guys. And we're excited for what you're doing for the industry. Like I said, the electrical side of the home services is starving for this type of information. And I'm glad that you guys have an industry specific intentionality behind what you're doing. I love that you're both experienced in the trades, but you're also trying to bring the revelation about what communication can do for everybody in the electrical trucks, and that's such a great thing. It's what we're missing. It's what the industry needs. And a shout out to you guys for making that happen. If people are interested in joining the group, is that public group, or is that open that they can just hop in there, or do they need to be permitted in? What does that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. It's public, so you can literally jump in, see stuff right away. Add myself, Clay Newmeyer, and Joseph at Joseph Lucani on Facebook as well. And as you get closer to us, you're also going to receive, every week we're given free value pieces, including that front door and club membership we talked about. We've got follow-up script, pricing tools. I mean, the list goes on and it just keeps growing, guys. To say it just short and sweet, like strategy is not the problem. State management is. The activity, the consistent activity is the problem. So we're not afraid of giving strategy away, and we do every day for that reason. So that's it in a nutshell, you guys. Join the group. Come join us there live, engage, and look forward to it.
That's great, guys. And as we close out the podcast today, if I could get both of you to just kind of answer the last question here, which is basically what is your hope? What is your hope for the up and coming electrical industry? What do you desire for them to become? The 20-somethings that are just getting into it, the 30 and 40-somethings that still have an open mind, and maybe a couple of those old timers out there that are saying, hey, you know what I've been doing isn't working. I'd like to try something new. What is your hope for where the industry can go?
Go ahead. You do your mind.
All right. Service to others is the highest form of distinction, right? Not representing ourselves in this way, not going through exactly what we talked about today and putting that stuff forward and really taking care of people and their needs is a disservice to others. So that's what I want to see. I want to see the service standard rise in this trade. I want to see a better practice group of premium service providers rising up so that we don't have to worry about that rat race piece, that race to the bottom. I don't have to worry about being overtaken by the low price guy on the block because you're not even close to the same. Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Joseph.
No, and I didn't mean to interrupt you on that. I feel like that was a great way of describing it. But for me, the electrical trade has done so much for me on a personal level in the fact of I literally was going to kill myself. And this allowed me, this process, this dedication to growth allowed me to get over that. But I wouldn't have even had the ability to get exposed to it if it wasn't for the electrical trade. And the thing is that there are so many electricians out there. Like there are so many of us that are either socially inept or that are neurodivergent or are just trying to figure a way to scratch it together. And there is no one giving them the advice on how to live life, how to grow, how to improve, how to develop a business, how to develop yourself personally. So my personal view of what I want this to come from is, Clay and I are definitely parallel. We want to rise all ships in the harbor. Don't get me wrong. I want every electrician we come in contact with to be better. But it's for what will make it a success in my eyes is if I can just stop one other person from going down the path I was going to go down and say, no, there's a better way. That will be success for me. Just knowing that I was able to save one more life from going down the path I was going to go down. That would mean the world to me.
I love it, guys. And you certainly have a great start at it. Make sure that you check out Joseph and Clay and all the resources that they have out their podcasts and everywhere else they are on social media. Thanks so much, guys, for being with us today. We really appreciate it, and keep up the great work.
Yeah, we appreciate you guys kind of doing what we do here, which is helping to take the stigma out of selling in the trades and making it seem less like anyone who wants to up their communication game and get better at getting people to say yes to the things that they offer. It does not mean that they are criminals or crooked or looking to get over on somebody.
Amen to that. I'm grateful that you and I run parallel.
I got a promise for you guys. We will not waste a single day in the pursuit of this venture.
That's what's up. You're the first one to make that promise on the show. What's happening?
Thanks, guys. It's been great.
Thank you.
Hey, that's a wrap for this podcast. I hope you enjoyed your time with Joseph and Clay, two really great guys who are doing good things in the home services industry, specific to electricians. And like I was saying in the show, there's such a starvation on that branch of the home services industry. And I love the fact that there's a dedicated team of guys who are pursuing the electricians and what they need to be doing better. Regardless as to whether you're an electrician or not, I think there was plenty of applicable messages in what they were talking about throughout the show in terms of making those options, presenting to the client, using your industry knowledge as an advantage to the client and not harming yourself by putting all that in a box, and also hurting the client by not giving them the service that they are due. We hope that you enjoyed the show, and you're always enjoying the show. Make sure to leave us a review and some feedback. We'd sure love to hear your comments and what you'd like to hear more about in the future. We're going to leave you now with our weekly challenge, which is the same each week, to choose to wake up every single morning and waste no day.